The sergeant forced her to kneel in gravel for an hour. She stood up and outmarched them all. The gravel bit into her knees like broken glass. Private Erin Thompson did not cry out. She did not blink. Above her, Sergeant Harrison's voice cracked across the training yard like a whip, and behind her, 42 recruits stood frozen in formation, afraid to breathe too loudly. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. It was hour 3 of the worst morning of her life. The sun had barely cleared the pines when Harrison singled her out. A missed step, a half-second late salute, some infraction so small it shouldn't have mattered. But it mattered to him. On your knees, he had barked, and she had gone down without hesitation, because that was the rule, and rules kept you alive out here. What she hadn't expected was that he would leave her there. Minute after minute, the gravel pressed ridges into her skin. Sweat mixed with dust on her face until she looked like she'd crawled out of the earth itself. She thought about her father, a mechanic who never finished basic training himself, who used to say that quitting was a debt you paid for the rest of your life. She thought about the recruiting officer who'd looked at her, all 5'4" of her, and asked if she was sure. She was sure. She had always been sure. But sure didn't stop her hands from trembling now, didn't stop the ache spreading up through her thighs like fire crawling up dry grass. The other recruits watched in silence. A few exchanged glances, quick, guilty, the kind of look people give when they know something is wrong but don't know if they're allowed to say so. Somewhere behind the formation, a boot shifted against gravel, a small sound that seemed enormous in the stillness. Harrison paced in front of her, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the moment she'd break. He'd broken recruits before. He was good at it. It was, in his mind, the whole point. You find the crack before the battlefield does, or the battlefield finds it for you and someone dies. She thought she'd never make it to the end of that hour. She was wrong. 40 minutes in, her vision blurred, not from tears but from the sheer effort of holding her spine straight when every fiber in her wanted to collapse forward into the stones. Somewhere in that blur, she found something she didn't know she had. Not defiance exactly, but a kind of quiet refusal. A decision, made cell by cell, that this moment would not be the one that defined her. The watchtower behind her cast a long shadow across the yard, and above it, bolted to the wood, a sign read, "Discipline builds victory." She stared past Harrison's boots at that sign and made it her whole world. At the 55-minute mark, something shifted in the ranks. A recruit near the back, a quiet kid named Alvarez who'd barely spoken since arriving, took one step forward, out of formation, in flagrant violation of every rule they'd been taught. It was small. It was reckless. It was the first crack in the wall of obedience Harrison had spent weeks building. Harrison spun toward him, fury rising, ready to make an example of a second soldier. But Alvarez didn't run. He didn't apologize. He simply said, low but steady, "Sir, she's been down there an hour. Permission to speak. Sir, that's enough." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had weight. It had a pulse. 42 recruits stood in that pause, and for the first time, so did their sergeant. Nobody expected what happened next. Harrison turned back to Thompson, and something in his face had changed, not softened exactly, but recalculated, like a man doing math he didn't want to do. "On your feet, Private," he said. And when she rose, legs screaming, knees bleeding into the dust, hands shaking at her sides, she did not stumble. She stood at full attention, chin level, eyes forward, as if the gravel had never touched her. That was the moment the yard felt truly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Here lies the real question this story leaves behind. Was Harrison's cruelty a lesson in discipline, or was it simply cruelty dressed up as one? The line between forging strength and breaking spirit is thinner than anyone wants to admit, and every soldier watching that morning had to decide, quietly, which side of that line they'd stand on when it was their turn to lead. 3 miles later, on the forced march that followed, Thompson did something nobody predicted. Bleeding knees and all, she did not fall to the back of the formation where the exhausted and the injured always drifted. She moved forward. Step by step, she passed recruit after recruit, her breath ragged but her pace unbroken, until she was setting the tempo for the entire company. Harrison watched from the flank, saying nothing, but something had settled in his jaw. The specific stillness of a man witnessing exactly what he'd hoped, against his own methods, to find. By the time they reached the ridge, Thompson was leading. Not because anyone ordered her to. Because she simply refused to stop. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back. And sometimes, so does strength. Buried under gravel and doubt. Waiting only for someone brave enough to stand back up. She knelt in the dirt that morning and rose taller than anyone standing around her. If this story moved you, tell us below. Have you ever had to stand back up when everyone expected you to break? Share this with someone who needs the reminder today, and subscribe, because every week, we tell the stories of ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when it mattered most.